No, I've seen them coming.
So that's great. Attendees are just arriving now, so we'll just give it a moment as people start to enter the room before we formally start, but you're all welcome.
Absolutely. I can see we're getting a good number through. So we'll just leave it a couple more moments before we make a start today. Okay, I think we shall make a start. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first day of this year's Bristol Housing Festival Expo. My name is Andrea Kelleher. I'm an Associate Director at the Turley Planning Consultancy here in Bristol. And my role is to work with and consult local communities and stakeholders to provide them with an opportunity to shape and influence new developments coming forward within the Bristol City.
Hi, I'm Amy Hickson. I'm also at Turley. I'm within the planning team. Ultimately, I work with developers and the council to ensure high quality developments get planning permission to deliver the much needed housing and high quality public realm within the city. And we would just like to welcome you to today's events.
So you may be wondering why you have two people introducing you to today's session. Kind of sat at an awkward socially distanced level, looking like we are presenting BBC News Points West today. Well, the reason we're both here is because Amy and I work together, combining both our planning and communication skills to help deliver some of the Housing Festival's key projects, such as Hope Rise in St George and Bucklock's first UK scheme on Airport Road in South Bristol. And we support these schemes both through the planning system, but also ensuring that community and stakeholder engagement is a key part of those schemes' successes. And it's great to see that despite the limitations of the new normal, that this year's Housing Festival is still able to bring you a fantastic and varied expo. And recovering from the COVID pandemic is at the centre of this afternoon's session, providing us with an opportunity to take stock and to build better in response to the last 8 months' events. As a city, Bristol has not shied away from the debate surrounding its future and what it may look like. Driven by Bristol's One City priorities, in recent years, Bristol has taken centre stage in implementing creative solutions to housing delivery. This has been contributed to by the Bristol Housing Festival, but also the creation of Gorham Homes and looking at modern methods of construction to deliver new housing within the city.
Now, although the COVID lockdown turned construction, ground it to a halt briefly, we're now seeing within the city some schemes coming forward and starting up again. So it's pertinent to consider what pathway Bristol will take to reignite that vigour to strengthen both the city and its community, to ensure the city rebuilds in a way that's fairer, more inclusive and sustainable. So, chaired by Councillor Helen Godwin, today we'll be hearing from some key individuals in the industry to explore the role of housing and construction and the role that has to play in the recovery of Bristol. This is ahead of the launch of the Bristol One City recovery strategy later this week. Through our work with the Housing Festival, ZPods and Bucklock, we are seeing firsthand how the potential housing innovation has and the benefits that will have for our Bristol community. For example, placing sustainable initiatives literally at the foundations of house building and focusing on suitable and affordable homes for all. It will be fascinating to hear today from Elaine, Jez, Andrea, Phil and Andrew on how this will play a key part in Bristol's recovery moving forward. So we are delighted to be here today to support and sponsor this event. Both Andrea and I are advocates of the Bristol Housing Festival and what it represents, and we hope that you find today's session both insightful and interesting. So without further ado, Councillor Helen Godwin, over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Amy. And thank you again to Turley for sponsoring today's event. It's great to have you all with us. I can see the numbers are still steadily rising in terms of people joining this session. So thank you very much for being with us. As Andrea said, this is the first event of the Bristol Housing Festival Virtual Expo 2020, which is a series of events and online content starting today, running right through until the 1st of November. Today's event will be is being streamed live and is also being recorded, just so that participants are aware of that. This work also aligns with the One City Week of Recovery and Resilience, which is launching this week, culminating in the publication of the strategy that Amy mentioned later on this week on Friday. So we're trying to keep today's session thinking about the recovery and thinking about the role that construction and housing can play in that recovery. And to that end, we've got some excellent speakers that will be able to come in on lots of different angles. My role is a cabinet member for women, children, families and homes, which is quite a mouthful and quite a big job, as I'm sure you can imagine. What I'm trying to do is think about how we in the City Council have run our landlord services, think about our relationship with the private sector and how we essentially put people and families at the heart of those policies. When we were elected back in 2016, we talked about housing being our #1 priority. We still have too many families in temporary accommodation, and we still have an acute crisis of housing in Bristol. But we are, as a council, delivering. We have delivered 150 council houses so far, with more in pipeline, and we're on target. We've got around 1,500 new homes going through the pipeline at the minute, although obviously COVID has slowed things down significantly. But that commitment is there, and the Housing Festival is obviously a really big part of our commitment and determination to keep housing as our top priority. So what I want to do is firstly to introduce our speakers. The speakers will speak for about 5 minutes each, and they will give an insight as to where their, I guess, direction in this topic. And we'll talk about their experience, and then what we'll do is we'll have a sort of facilitated discussion after that, and we'll start to bring in some questions as well. So if you are able to input your questions through the Q&A box, then I'll be able to look at those and we'll get through as many as we can today in the discussion. We haven't got a huge amount of time, actually. We've only got until 3 o'clock. So our speakers will give their introductions, and then we'll try and get the discussion going as quickly as possible and try and incorporate as many of your thoughts into that as we possibly can. So without further ado, I'll hand over to our first speaker, Elaine Alfort, who is Head of Housing Delivery at Bristol City Council. Elaine is an architect with over 20 years experience in the construction industry. Thanks, Elaine.
Thank you for that introduction, Helen. So as Helen introduced me as a Head of Housing Delivery at Bristol City Council. So Bristol historically has recognised that there is a need to prioritise building of new homes in the city. The council acknowledges and actively acknowledges the housing crisis and has prioritised housing delivery across the council. This has resulted in the council being focused on supporting housing delivery through a number of routes, putting measures in place to ensure that housing delivery is specifically targeted. So things like the formation of the housing delivery team with specialist housing related skills and knowledge, working across numerous strands to help accelerate housing delivery across the city. The direct delivery build programme is also key, and Bristol has a very active building programme, as Helen suggested, building new council homes. The team is currently working on numerous sites at all stages from inception to completion. In addition to the direct delivery programme, the council has also set up Gorham Homes. Teams throughout the council, so that's planning and property and the housing delivery team, work hard to support them. We have a close working relationship, and we are collaborating on a future pipeline of sites that Gorham can deliver alongside their partners. Gorham are currently working on 2 really important sites for the city, so Romney House and Baltic Wharf. We also have quite complicated major projects in and around the city too, and we often work with delivery partners such as community housing groups, private partners, to deliver those high quality homes and make great places for people to live. I apologise for my dogs barking in the background if you can hear them. The team uses those skills to help deliver those developments. Quite often they're very complicated, and you know, it is risky for the city, but we put our efforts into it, and it's sites such as Hengrove Park and Glen Queen Square in Southmead are really good examples of those complicated and major projects. But larger sites aren't our only focus. Smaller sites offer great opportunities too, and the team works with those smaller sites and gets them ready for disposal to RP partners, community-led housing groups, and self-builders as well. So no project is too large or too small for us to consider working on. Housing enabling is another really important strand focus for us. We focus and we work with RPs to offer support and facilitate access to the council grant funding programme, which is considerable. The team also focuses on what's happening today, but not just today and this year, but it looks forward too. And we're working on that future pipeline of developments, continually looking with property at what land is available. We're also working really hard on building innovation in, and you'll hear from Jez later on about the Housing Festival and the work they're doing on MMC. So across the city, there are a variety of projects that have tapped into MMC. We're working with Innovate UK. We're also working with the Bristol Housing Festival, as I've mentioned. But this is hopefully a taste of what Bristol is going to be about, helping speed up construction and improve building performance through the use of MMC. I should also mention at this point the work that the council is doing on homelessness initiatives, because everybody deserves a home. So there's a dedicated team working on a number of different initiatives to help alleviate homelessness across the city too. So as you can see from all that, and that's just a very high level overview of what we do, delivering homes is complicated and it does take time. But as a council, Bristol is doing great work and we're not standing still. We're not assuming that one solution fits all. And we're not becoming complacent that the solutions of the past suit today in this ever-changing world. Bristol is responding, we're responding really positively. And we review that work and we're very self-critical as well. So any lessons learned through the process, we can instigate those positive responses and help move things forward. So as you can see, that quick overview of that multifaceted work the Bristol City Council are doing and responding to those challenges around housing delivery. So I hope that just gives you an overview of what we do and of the great work that Bristol currently is undertaking. I'll hand back to Helen.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Elaine. Okay, next we're going to hear from Andrew Linford, who is Global Technology Lead for Landscape Architecture at Jacobs. He's a landscape architect and urban designer. And Andrew also is a member of the One City Environmental and Sustainability Board. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you very much and good afternoon. I think I'd like to start with a little bit of context in terms of the One City Environmental Sustainability Board. In February, Bristol launched its One City Climate Strategy, and in that vision statement, in 2030, Bristol is carbon neutral and climate resilient. And in the second sentence, it talks about new jobs and investment. So it's not all about environment, it is very much about growth, and all of those broader aspects that the One City plan looks to deliver in terms of health, well-being, education, all for local people. In June, I spoke with the One City Homes and Communities Board, and we posed a number of questions about a low carbon retrofit economic recovery package to help towards carbon neutrality. And in that, I would refer you to the work that's been undertaken by the Centre for Sustainable Energy, and their document Building Retrofit is a prime candidate for driving inclusive green economy. There's some interesting numbers in there, which just give you an indication of the scale of the opportunity here in terms of not only delivering better homes and houses for people, but also that economic aspect. 165,000 individual properties, £32 billion worth of investment to improve those homes in terms of carbon neutral heating and improving insulation and all of those things. That equates to about 60,000 person years of work. For me personally, it means, what can I do about swapping my gas boiler? I need, if we're going to contribute to carbon neutrality, I need an alternative form of heating that's cost effective and installed by people who know what they're doing. Skills there for a start in terms of, not only technology, but skills. Whilst there might be a bit of a focus on the building and in retrofitting, let's not forget those multiple benefits beyond jobs and skills. We can address fuel poverty, we can look at health benefits, and with success, we can achieve the scalability that we need to deliver the carbon neutrality. Just remember, we've got 9 years to go. 2030 is our target, so there's a bit of a hurry up. But perhaps also as the opportunity to think beyond the building with any retrofit to achieve those placemaking skills, which are so crucial in terms of delivering the homes where we want, that are good for people to live. For example, One City has also launched the Ecological emergency strategy, the first city in the UK to do so, to declare an ecological emergency. And it includes some ambitious targets. 30% of land managed for wildlife, for example. So can we encourage our existing estate managers and homeowners to manage in parks and open spaces and their gardens in a different way? Can we learn new landscape management skills? Can we grow different plants which have a greater biodiversity impact? So the Avon Wildlife Trust, for example, has a great list of ideas for what can people do in their gardens. So again, look up their website, and they took a lead on the ecological emergency strategy and the development of that. And just aside, the information, the Future Economy Network is holding an event on the 20th of October, looking at the value of nature to business. So again, there's some opportunities in there to think about this. Perhaps also, what can retrofit do with our streets? Take a look at Greener Grangetown as a water management project, delivered biodiversity, amenity, health, well-being, water treatment, a whole load of things, not just about the building, but also about the streets and places that we live. So in terms of new build, just to finish off, I do understand the multiple benefits of fabric first, modern method of constructions. Delivering highly efficient homes has enormous value to the people who live in them, as well as offering jobs and the development of new technologies. But I am nervous from few examples that I've seen more recently that the technology is the focus and that placemaking is much less of a consideration. Is there a danger of delivering high performance boxes in unsustainable locations in terms of transport connectivity, traditional highways design, car parking, minimal consideration of the public realm? Are the materials being used local and sustainable? What are the ecological impact choices that we're making in terms of materials? So I'm posing a slightly different question here, I suppose. In my mind, we must consider the placemaking alongside the modern methods of construction and all the benefits that come. People and communities, location, the identity, the heritage, the peculiar, the natural and the built environment, that context. In there, we must consider the movement, the walking, the cycling. Never has it been so important. We appreciate the impacts that public transport is going through at the moment. How do we reduce the carbon footprint, and how do we offer choice? We need to think about the mix of uses, community development, those jobs, those homes, they are well connected, and safe, inclusive, accessible, green infrastructure, supporting a life of a place that must be considered alongside the technology. Can be done. Goldsmith Street in Norwich, 2019 RIBA Sterling Prize winner. Passive house standards and by all accounts a great place to live. A modern masterpiece was the judge described it as, and York are looking to roll out a similar scheme for 600 homes shortly. So I do believe construction and housing can assist in the recovery and delivery of homes that people need, but let's bring all of those skills that architects, landscape architects and the engineers have so that we do build good places for people to live in. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thanks, Andrew. There's already so many questions I want to ask off the back of that, so it's going to be a really good conversation. Okay, so next we move to Phil Stott. Phil, thanks for joining us. Phil is Head of Construction and Sustainability at YTKO. Phil's worked in construction for over 10 years. I've just got in brackets who YTKO are, so I'll just share that in case people don't know. YTKO provide private and public sector expertise in supporting entrepreneurs, growth businesses and corporates. All yours, Phil.
Thank you, cheers. So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Phil Stott. I'm here today to talk to you about this economic recovery, and obviously quickly answering Helen's question, YTK obviously do a lot of public sector programs, but we also do a lot around construction. Obviously my background right from the David Cameron Hugger Husky days has been involved in trying to use construction as a way to push the UK's green agenda. So from our point of view, we're obviously involved as well as Andrew in the One City environmental funding priority group. We're also involved in leading the Innovate UK Enabling Housing Innovation for Inclusive Growth project, which Jez will be speaking about later. But really, I wanted to just sort of touch on this theme of economic recovery. It's really nice to see construction as a central point in the recovery plan. Too often, construction sort of the dirty sector that no one talks about, but is an absolute key leader for the UK economy, and what's more, in the economy in the West. In, for example, South Bristol, where we're doing a project at the moment, construction makes up 1 in 4 businesses. And the West is great, but it does tend to focus on, you know, sort of manufacture and innovation. And obviously we've got this great engineering background, but, you know, for construction now to be taking center stage is fantastic for the likes of me. So when we look at construction, before the lockdown, you may or may not know that the Southwest was predicted to be the 2nd highest growing region in the next few years leading up to 2030. Only Wales was actually beating us. We needed to create 27,000 new jobs in the region. And that was a really encouraging sort of moment. And obviously, after the lockdown and after we've had the sort of hiatus in construction, again, it was quite encouraging to see construction not necessarily grinding to a halt. The Construction Leadership Council, who I've worked with for many years, they were straight off the bat in advising people how to maintain safety and health and healthy spaces on site. In addition to that as well, you had sort of some quite interesting findings. The likes of Loughborough University did a study over 3 major infrastructure construction sites during the lockdown, and they found that although 50% of the staff had gone on furlough, productivity only dropped by 30%. Now, if you imagine that in your own company or your own job, imagine laying off half the staff and they disappear and walk out the door and still maintaining some semblance of normality in your productivity. It was really encouraging that actually construction, which has traditionally got a bit of a reputation in terms of mistakes and in terms of poorer quality, it was actually really encouraging that construction was finding ways to be more accurate in its planning and more thoughtful in its approach. Furthermore, we found that in terms of the green side of construction, we've got a great opportunity there. Sustainable construction has been a sort of it's not been the hottest topic in government for a while. I was there, like I said, when we were aiming to make construction the greenest in Europe. And actually what happened was there was a bit of a housing crisis and the standards for new homes went down, but now we're seeing them go back up. And the government's really committed that by 2050 we should be at net zero homes. And the issue with that is that actually it's not just the new builds, it's the retrofit, and Andrew's sort of touched on that already. There's 29 million homes in the UK. And in order to retrofit all of those in time for 2050, we would need to be doing basically 1.8 homes every minute. So that's nearly 2 homes every minute being retrofitted, which means, you know, getting insulation in, improving the thermal performance of the building, and then looking to things like renewables to tag onto the building. And that's a really big target, and that creates a lot of opportunities for jobs. So when we talk about economic recovery, we can't get away from the fact that if we are going to meet these targets by 2050, and then Bristol is looking at 2030, there's a really exciting opportunity there to create jobs. They think that for 2050, you'll need around about 500,000 builders and electricians straight off the bat. Furthermore, you will need a further 3 million jobs to maintain that momentum. So there's a lot of jobs there. And then if you take 20 years out of the equation, it really is a piece of pump priming activity that's required to build that workforce. And absolutely the skills gaps around those issues are paramount. I mean, I've lived through the time where 50% of exterior wall insulations failed technical install, which meant people's homes were ruined by having exterior wall insulation. We can't go back on that. We have to learn from those mistakes. We have to make sure that the quality and the skills of the workforce is in place. So I'm really looking forward to this panel today. It should be really exciting, and I'm really excited that construction has got its final place in the spotlight.
Wonderful. Thanks, Phil. And do you know that was exactly 5 minutes? Very good. Great. Okay, so we now move on to hear from Jez Sweetland. Jez is the project director of Bristol Housing Festival, and he also founded the Housing Festival in 2018. Jez, over to you.
Thanks, Helen, and thank you to our speakers. Lots to sort of reflect on there, but let me just slightly change tack, if I may, and then reach back around, and we'll look at these other areas, how they all interlink, because I think one of the things that we need to be really thinking about and engaging in now is what is that longer term industrial strategy where we build the strategy for the green recovery. And one of the things that I find particularly interesting is what can we do now that's building that pipeline of homes, but how can we drive the values that support the quality and the sustainability of those homes as they come forward. And Mark Farmer and Mike Diath a couple of weeks ago produced a report called Build Homes, Build Jobs, Build Innovation, a blueprint for a housing-led industrial strategy. And that is focused for them principally on affordable housing and how can volumetric and modern methods of construction be part of that solution. And it's interesting, I think one of the premise of their approach is really around the fact that we do have, particularly when we look at what it's going to look like post-COVID-19 in terms of that recovery, where we have market failure, particularly in the UK, and of course had this pre-COVID, was in our ability to really drive that affordable housing sector. That's where we see the market failure, the ability to use the land and drive that affordable housing. Now, there was an interesting report from Savills that came out a few weeks ago. They published a cautious assessment of the current sector, which is looking at facing increasing mortgage hurdles, falling stock markets, savings deposits being impacted. And they're anticipating there could be a 40% reduction in transactions for people wanting to buy homes as we come out of this initial bounce back. Now, I'm not wanting to sort of cast terror everywhere, but I think what we do recognise is that when you rely on a return of capital model for delivery of housing, there may be an issue about how those developers may need to, as we've seen in other recessions, or certainly other sort of stagnation in the housing market, they'll need to stop that supply. And into that space, what may be or what might be the solution for modern methods of construction when you start to transition from a traditional build brick and block approach to a manufacture process which relies and is deployed around the ability to have an aggregation of sites and a throughput of numbers of orders. So it's a sort of a focusing on a very different methodology and finance around how that housing is delivered. And when I think about the pressures we're going to face and how that emerging industry in the UK could be supported, I think, around that green agenda, as Andrew says, around that placemaking agenda, the tool is that how we build the homes, and then we need all the expertise to gather around it. So I do think that there's an opportunity. Phil mentioned the Innovate UK bid, and we're running an event on that tomorrow, which Bristol City Council and using its housing revenue account is a real key driver of that, of looking at how we can start to learn how to safely and responsibly deploy modern methods of construction. But it's got to be a values-based proposition. So I think that the first thing is, post-recovery, if there is a risk that we're going to see a downturn in that traditional build supply of housing, how can we diversify that supply? And actually, of course, national government is committed to the diversification of that supply. It's also committed through its affordable housing grant, about 11 billion has been released to ensure that 25% of that housing is delivered through MMC. So there's a regional and a national policy piece aligning here around how we can start to look at funding and delivering this housing. Nicholas Boyce-Smith, who was the director of Create Streets and was the co-chair of the Better Building Beautiful Commission, in the forward to that report I mentioned, said, we have the most concentrated development sector with the smallest proportion of SMEs or which is self-impeded by high planning risk. smallest of self-build, modern methods of construction whose high upfront investment is impeded by high planning risk have struggled to gain a foothold. The digitisation, pattern book and design code agendas set out in the government's important white paper, Planning for the Future, could, if done wisely, alter those fundamentals. So we are at a cusp of change. And I think it's really critical that we're thinking about the change that we need and how can these new tools, these new supply of housing potentially help us deliver that recovery, but also ensuring it's green. And I think that the second point I really just want to make into that space is how, therefore, do we drive the values of that emerging industry in the UK, and how can Bristol and the Southwest be right at the centre of creating the right kind of jobs and making that focus on the quality and the sustainability of our housing. Modern methods of construction should not be allowed to be a race to the bottom to produce cheap homes quickly. That's absolutely critical, and that is something that is going to rely on a public and private collaboration to drive that agenda, to drive that zero carbon agenda. It was interesting to see that the Southwest, Homes for the Southwest, which is a gathering of CEOs of the largest housing associations, they submitted a request into the comprehensive spending review that was obviously cancelled recently. But they were talking a lot about how one of the challenges is how do you get the current public land disposal strategy to be reviewed so that in future the priority for public land is not for cash, it's not for treasury, it's not for capital receipt, it's objective-led housing. So we're using things like the Social Value Act, we're using the understanding of the wisdom of procurement and land disposal to drive that industrial strategy and to drive the quality of that housing. And I think just two final points on that, I think, to make, if I may. One is we need to think, if we're really going to understand how to create an industry response, to think about how we use the aggregation of land to drive that industry response. And that, for my mind, can't simply be about Bristol. It's about that partnership with the wider region. And the second is that I think there is an opportunity, and we're seeing this emerge in the sector. We're seeing this emerge in our region around how you create this centre of excellence so that we create a wider ecosystem, which isn't just about large factories, but it's about the SMEs, it is about the self-build, it's about the community-led, and it's about the maturing of that supply chain to create those green jobs and create that kind of inward investment that supports an understanding and comprehension of how to deliver this at scale. And two final comments from that, if I may. The Build Homes, Build Jobs, Build Innovation report alluded to something similar in there. It said that they believe there's a unique opportunity to bring those SME trade contractors and suppliers into the modular NMNC market by establishing a new generation of consolidation centres. And really, we're talking about how do we bring the industry together with the public sector and the land to drive that agenda to make sure that we're delivering the affordable and the quality. And Nesta, which is a think tank, produced a report in June 2020 called Innovation After Lockdown. And one of their key recommendations to national government, and I think we're seeing this locally in terms of the leadership of Bristol City Council, is how can you use test beds both to stimulate innovation in the foundational economy, foundation, I think in this sense being the housing sector, which is so foundational to all that we do and how we live, and to increase the supply of innovations developed at the frontier that are readily applicable to that economy. And they give an example. Government could provide support for initiatives that provide a controlled or bounded space for testing innovation in real world or close to real world conditions that focus on working out how to make best use of emerging technologies, creating opportunities for sustainable and green growth, and organizational and social innovations to improve productivity in particular sectors. So we have, I think, a huge opportunity building on the back of the aerospace and the engineering industry we already have in the Southwest to really drive a kind of revolution how we think about and deliver critically around that innovation space in affordable housing for the Southwest. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jez. And finally, we'll hear from Andrea Dell. Andrea is head of the City Office for One City, and she leads the coordination and delivery of the One City approach. Andrea, over to you.
Thanks, Helen. And firstly, thanks to Jessie and Jez for the Housing Festival and organising this. I definitely think the Housing Festival is a prime example of a One City approach completely in action, a recognition that we have to break down silos, we have to work in different ways, we have to work with different sectors in actually to be able to achieve kind of the future of the city that we want and the communities that we want. So thank you very much. And thank you as well to all of the other panellists, particularly to Phil and to Andrew, who I think have stolen quite a few of the points I was going to make as well. So that's always great. So, but no, it is fantastic. So just for those of you who might not be aware, the City Office effectively is a small team. We are the enabling hub for the One City approach. Somebody has previously described us as the dating agency for the city, as in our role primarily is about bringing different sectors, different partners from all different walks of life in the city with citizens, basically to create both future plans. So we have the One City plan that sets out our vision for what we want to be as a city by 2050. And through that, we also have a governance structure that brings together a wide range of different people to actually basically achieve the goal for where we want to be by 2050. There is a recognition that, we've got advanced targets, as Andrew's talked about, 2030 for carbon neutrality. That work has to start now. Similarly, for what we want to achieve by 2050 in terms of the infrastructure in our city, the services in our city, how we work together, we have to start doing that work now, and we have to start doing that work collectively. So that is what One City is primarily all about. And I just want a sort of personal reflection as well. I first arrived in Bristol as a university student. I was very fortunate, I went to the University of Bristol, but my first job was in the council's housing department. And on my first day, I went out to Hartcliffe, having lived in Cottam and Clifton primarily. And this was before the Morrisons was in Hartcliffe, and the housing office was covered in razor wire, and the door was a sort of metre door, thick with steel. And I thought, this isn't Bristol. This is not somewhere I recognise. And I'm going to be honest, a little part of me was like, what have I done? And actually, that just highlighted to me, more importantly, and after 8 years of working in the council's housing department, just how fundamental housing and a home is to all walks of life. It is much more than a roof and a wall. It's the community. It impacts on our safety, our health. It impacts on where we go to school, our education chances, where we go to work, how we travel to work. And from that, how we travel to work, how do we travel to work sustainably? All of this is key. It's all interconnected, and that is primarily what the One City approach is all about, how we bring everything together so that we are thinking about communities in different ways. You go out to some of our wider estates, and I've been there in my time in housing with government officials who have stood there and looked and said, oh, it's lovely and green here. It is lovely and green. Unfortunately, there's no bus to get anybody to the centre of town or to employment. There's one supermarket that's prices are at the highest you can get because there is no other access to services. So it's absolutely critical. And that's kind of what One City is all about. So as Phil and Andrew and everyone have alluded to, this Friday, we will be launching the One City Economic Recovery Strategy. That's a recovery and renewal strategy. And we're calling it as the first iteration because there is a recognition that we do not know what is coming over the next 6 months, both with COVID-19, the winter and flu, but also as well with Brexit. So it's a first iteration of a strategy for how the city is going to renew and recover from COVID-19. And a key part of that has construction and housing as a core element of our recovery. The priorities focus, and you can actually see this on our statement of intent, that is already live, but we will also make sure that everyone can see the strategy document when it comes live on Friday. So we'll send it around to everyone whose details we've got in this group. But our key priorities are to seek to reduce poverty and inequality, to increase the city's resilience and environmental sustainability, and to enhance the economic and social well-being of every community. And where do I see construction having a role in this? In this city, approximately over a third of our population is under the age of 24. Young people are facing mass unemployment. It's going to be really particularly hitting that area. We've already started to have conversations about what is the role of construction, the whole industry, in supporting those young people, supporting those pathways into employment, supporting those pathways in, for example, South Bristol, where we've talked about how construction is a key employer in that area. How can we help to support businesses to make life easier for them to give chances to younger people, to give chances also to adults who may have been out of work for a really long period of time? We need to think about how we operate more collectively. How can we in the city office enable, for example, pathways to apprenticeships that run across different areas? Construction, as we know, comes and goes. You might need an electrician for a period of time on one site, then they're not needed for a period of time. Can they actually be taken to another site through companies working together, supported by something like the city office? So those are just some of the practical ideas that we're really thinking about. Actually, what does construction have to do in kind of driving forward this economic recovery in what is such an unprecedented time? So I will flag that for anyone who's interested, we have got an event also on Thursday, which is looking at the two uplifting topics of how businesses can survive through winter 2021. through the COVID pandemic, but also through Brexit as well, and thinking about things in a different way about how, by breaking down silos, whilst recognising obviously businesses, we have stakeholders, businesses are struggling to survive themselves as well, how we can support businesses as a city, but also as well how we can support people like our young people, like our unemployed, like some of the most vulnerable people in the city, to create the future that we want. So that's a very rapid canter through One City. There we go, Helen.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Andrea. There's so much in all of what you've said, and we've got a few questions that are starting to come through on the Q&A as well. So if people are keen to see the panel answer on some specifics, then please do get those questions. Continue to send those questions in. I just wanted to start us off with, we've got just so everyone knows where we are. We've got about 20 minutes left. So I think the best thing for us to do is just to sort of start our discussion really, and I'll feed in some of the questions that have already come through on the chat. But my first question, and this has been picked up by quite a few people in their presentations, but we're talking about this huge opportunity, aren't we, to provide jobs through construction, whether that's new builds, whether that's retrofit, whether that's the MMC sort of line. But I guess my question that I'd like to open up is how do we align everything that we need to align? So how do we align training providers and education institutions to make sure that we are training our young people into the right jobs? How do we work with schools and colleges to get the right courses available? How do we let how do we tell businesses that we're here to support them in that? How do we build those connections, and how do we access funding to do that? Because I know that there are kind of new funding pots coming down, and obviously in our region the funding for training is held by the combined authority. But how do we kind of come together as a sector or as one city and say, okay, this is the process. This is what happens when somebody's leaving school at 16. These are the options for jobs in construction that are green, good jobs that are potentially skills for life that can give you a career path. How do we enable all of that, really? Phil, I saw your hand. Do you want to start us off on that?
Yeah, thank you, Helen. I've spent many years working with the skills sector in construction, and part of the problem is construction's got an image crisis. If you speak to a 5-year-old and ask them what a job in construction means, they will say it means working with bricks. Actually, there's a range of roles to the point where I could say any profession that you think you can do outside of construction, you can also do inside of construction and probably be paid better. Construction has got a skills crisis like you wouldn't believe. 175,000 to 200,000 people are leaving the sector as a result of Brexit, and we need 300,000 homes a year. So with construction and skills, there is also a problem in terms of people don't understand what the sector is like. You've got roughly 94% of it is white male. So there's huge problems in terms of inclusivity and diversity in the sector. We run a project called Building Growth Southwest, which helps to develop these pathways, because it's about breaking down the barriers and changing the face of construction so that you can understand it can be a creative, rewarding environment to work in. It's not all about being grumpy and sad on site in January. So with construction as it is, it's also the skills infrastructure is a little bit broken as well, I would say. There's very defined pathways into construction, which have always been there and will always be there. You know, in apprenticeships does play a little role in, you know, the problem of that. And what you should look to do with construction is make people understand and be excited about the training opportunities within it. It's not all about being an apprentice in one trade that you choose at the age of 16 and then you're stuck there for the rest of your career. It's about exploring the different types of role you could do within construction, and also about understanding what it is to work for yourself. It is the most dominated SME sector, and by SME I really mean micro businesses, so 10 employees and under, anywhere in the UK economy. And yet you can become someone who works in construction almost with a guarantee you're going to work for yourself, and you will not get taught how to work and operate your business. So what we tend to find is that people don't know how to pay taxes. They don't know how to contract with people. They don't understand how to give sick pay and health benefits. And it's about actually broadening the number of skills that you need in construction so that you can operate as a functioning small business and also have the skills and expertise to improve the quality of the sector.
Okay, that's great. Jez, did you want to come in, or Elaine, on that as well?
Yeah, I'll just make one brief comment, if I may, and then Elaine, feel free to. I think, I mean, totally agree with what Phil said. I think also to be encouraged that a lot of those things are already within Bristol. So things like Western College, which has got its own sort of MMC section, is really encouraging young people into that industry and learning how to connect that straight into jobs and industry. But the problem is, or the opportunity is, how do we ensure that all of these things are working in partnership, enabled by the public sector, to work with the private sector to ensure that the right training and the right jobs are then at the end of that pipeline, so that we don't have people training for skills that when they then leave colleges, they've actually trained the wrong section. And I think for me, a lot of that is about the wisdom and strategic planning of aggregating, as I said, not just in Bristol, but probably across the region, to say, this is the public land that's coming forward. What is the objective led of that, both in terms of the sustainability, the quality, but also the industrial strategy piece, where you can then convene with the private sector to really say, look, this is what we're bringing. This is what you need. How can we maximize that objective so that there's a shared vision around those outcomes? And I think it's stopping the kind of, we need the individual and the piecemeal, but we also need the overarching strategic partnership, which I think is happening, but I think COVID shows that we need to do more and more quickly.
Okay, thanks. Elaine, did you want to come in at all on that?
Yes, I will briefly. I think for me, I think getting people to understand, like Phil said, that construction and the construction industry has so many more jobs than just being a brickie or a plumber or an electrician. And from everything from accounting all the way through to IT, those sort of jobs can be very much and easily transferable to the construction sector. And it's those businesses that support the construction sector then that can tap into those skills. So it's about getting out there. It's about getting school kids to understand that just because you train as an accountant or you train as an IT specialist or you're good at maths doesn't mean you can't go into the construction industry. And also I think it's really important to make them accept that or make them understand it's not about being sad and lonely and very wet on a January afternoon in the dark. There is so much more vibrancy to it. It can be very fulfilling. And just because you start out in one corner of the construction industry doesn't mean you won't end up somewhere else. I'm a chartered architect by profession. I spent many years drawing things on a drawing board. I still have a drawing board here, but my job is not about architecture anymore. It's about delivering homes, it's about people, and it's about places. So for me, that's really exciting. And if we can get the young people around us to understand there's so much more to offer, then we will win.
That's great, thank you. Andrea, did you have your hand or? No, it's all right.
I didn't actually. A wasp went in front of me. I think it's dying because of winter. But I will just kind of pick up really briefly on a couple of points. I think it's right. I think it's about people both understanding, particularly say at graduate level, kind of what are the opportunities that exist in the construction industry, the fact that actually there is such a different range of roles that can be involved in, and that actually those roles can take you anywhere globally almost actually, and that actually is a big draw through to as well. I think the points Helen talked about is how can we help to support the industry, and when I say we, I mean the council, I mean city office, but to support the industry to basically, as you say, fill that skills gap that Phil talked about. How actually can we tap into the amazingness that we have in the city, and that's through all different walks of the city. That's from graduates, it's through to kind of everybody. How we can actually tap that through lifelong learning, through college learning, but also as well as I think to not have kind of the fear that I think possibly as someone who worked in housing a long time ago used to have, where it was very separate. You had public sector, you had private sector, and they met through planning, but then pretty much they then backed away. Whereas actually I think there's a recognition about, we understand that the industry, that businesses, there's profit margins that have to be met. We have to understand that, but there is still ways of doing this in a different way that I think means that we can actually help to both deal with some of the issues we're dealing with in the city regarding unemployment, deal with the skills gap, pulling them together doesn't seem to be completely insurmountable. Clearly there's still a lot to do there, but I think I would really be fascinated to kind of hear initial thoughts from kind of people about actually what would be the top 3 things that would enable your company to basically be able to reach in and work with the city on this. So that's sort of a bit of a plea out to everybody, but I do think there's a fantastic, I'd loath to use opportunity in the phrase of COVID, where people are unfortunately passing away, and we will see job losses and we will see businesses go under. But there is a moment in time that I think we do need to see to take that forward.
I can feel a construction roundtable, One City type event coming on to talk about that. That would be great, wouldn't it? The next point I wanted to try and raise I'm going to try and incorporate some of the questions that are coming in as well. But it was the point that Andrew made about placemaking and about how we sort of hurtle towards innovation and doing things differently and using technology in a positive way. How do we still consider place and how we make our communities work, both from a kind of aesthetic sense, I guess, but also, we talk an awful lot now about how we want to keep spaces green and places that are that encourage physical activity and active travel and play. And there's this very interesting idea of the criteria for a child-friendly city are exactly the same as the criteria for a sustainable city. So how do we sort of start to package that up and bringing into that as well maybe the proposed changes around planning and the threat or otherwise that might bring to some of that work. So Andrew, do you want to start us up on that? It's probably our last topic because we're on about 10 to 3.
I think there was a question in there somewhere. But I think it just sums it up in terms of the complexity. Perhaps just pick up Mr. Redwell's comment earlier in the questions is, yeah, I mean, placemaking is, that sustainable transport is crucial. And with the pandemic has seen our transport systems turned on their heads. And I don't think I've ever seen so many cyclists. I've never seen so many kids cycling to school, but equally, I've never seen so many empty buses. The whole system has just kind of, as I said, just been tipped on its head. And hopefully we'd all be back to normal, but perhaps part of what we could consider is capturing some of those benefits that we've got in terms of how people are engaging with transport choice. Obviously, that choice is what we're looking for, rather than just presenting people with a single option. If the only place, as Andrea said earlier, the only way to get to your new home is in a car, we've missed the mark. But if we're not putting in the bus infrastructure, if we're not putting in the local rail infrastructure, we're also missing the mark. We're not presenting those choices. It does raise a question, how do we get those behaviour changes that to some extent have been imposed upon us in terms of our, I suppose, the pressure to drive because people don't want to use the bus for all of those reasons. Therefore, all of the work that people have been doing in terms of using cars less and promoting cycling and bus transport, that we've taken a bit of a backward step with that. So I think we mustn't lose sight of it. I think we must keep it in mind that there are these broader aspects and to hold on to and aspire to. I cycle everywhere because I have I have the luxury of that choice. But that cycling provision could be so much better. Do we hold on to those street closures that have been implemented within the city centre because what we're doing is creating physical space for people, but also a different environment, a different place, which is less dominated by the car. I've no idea if that answered your question, but I think just also to finish off, some of these new jobs that we talked previous question, some of them I think are quite cool, really. You could be inside a factory making houses never mind being out in the wet and miserable January weather, doing all sorts of new things. So I think, it is a complicated system, housing. It is not just boxes. It's not just boxes with walls and roofs. It is about those places. And I said in my bit at the beginning, holding on to those things which are all set out in the One City plan need to be part of this broader conversation.
That's great, thank you. Phil, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. As part of the Enabling Housing Innovation for Inclusive Growth project, really on the planning side, it's a really exciting time at the moment. We're doing a piece of work which is looking at the planning process within Bristol, and Bristol being really brave about this and saying, okay, look, things might not be as smooth and as speedy as they can be, but we're going to look at it ourselves and we're going to reflect on that and make improvements. And if you'd like to hear a bit more about this, as Jez mentioned, there's a second session on that. I also wanted to touch on something called the Urban Living Spd, which is something that I've been enjoying reading and is something I didn't necessarily know existed until we started the Innovate UK project. And that piece of, I think it's in draft form actually at the moment, but it might have been finally published. And it basically answers some of these concerns. It says, look, here's a method that and it's obviously, you know, Bristol are behind it, but it's fantastic. It's been given to all the Bristol designers to say, look, can these housing developments be looked at in terms of, you know, placemaking, in terms of green spaces, in terms of transport links, in terms of aesthetics? Because one of my biggest things when I came into the world of planning was how do you say what is, you know, one man's really attractive design to another person's sort of absolute robust, you know, brutalist architectural statements. And for me, it's all about having some robust processes that people can input on. So I'd say anyone who's, you know, got a free sort of half an hour, it's worth downloading the Urban Living Spd, because it does allay some of those fears around how MMC can make that. And just my final point was the role social value can play. We should start to use social value as a bit more of a stick. The Institute of Economic Development have just published a piece of research talking about how we can change the use of social value. So it's not so much just about energy performance apprenticeships and jobs. It can also be more about, like you say, transport links, looking at what matters to a city to build the sorts of developments that we want to see, so that investments are made in the right sorts of social value, so that we get the sort of developments that, again, work not just for the specific strategic alignment of the council at that point, but work for individuals who are going to live in those homes, so that they continue to have value in the long term.
Helen, can I just come in off the back of that? Because I think
we've got 2 minutes, so this is the final word. So
I think that the social value element is really important, and we've been speaking a bit to the Construction Innovation Hub, and they've been also doing a look at how you drive the sort of value proposition through larger scale procurement. And I think when you really want to look at all of these different issues and the complexity of housing to drive the right kind of construction jobs and economic recovery, we need to make this about outcome focused procurement and decision making. So, for example, if we start with that the purpose of the housing that we're built is to improve the mental and physical health of the population of Bristol, that drives your sustainability through your transport, because it doesn't make sense if it doesn't. It drives you thinking about homes that are child and family friendly, because it doesn't make sense. So how we drive the beginning of the conversation that results in the decisions we end up with is so critical. And I think there's this reconnection between objective-led, using then the way we use our land in the city to drive those outcomes, not just look at the immediate upfront cost, but that whole lifetime recovery of that investment.
Brilliant. That's the perfect way to end, isn't it? I thought when I saw how long this was that an hour wouldn't be enough, and clearly it isn't. I think we could probably all carry on for a lot longer, but we are close to 3 o'clock now, so we do need to close. So all that remains is for me to thank very much everyone on the panel for your contributions and for giving up your time today. Also to thank Turley once again, who are our sponsor, and to thank Amy and Andrea for their introduction, and also to thank all of you that are on the call and have signed up and have taken part through posting questions as well. Obviously, there are lots of other events coming up as part of this year's virtual housing festival. So if you have a look on the Housing Festival website, you'll see what else is out there. And obviously, there are lots of One City events coming up as well. And we'll be launching the strategy on Friday, so look out for that. But thank you all very much for coming along. Thanks again to the panel. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.